Hello, this is Susan Weinstein from Families for Depression Awareness. We recorded this webinar about the cognitive symptoms of depression with Dr. Alice Medalia as part of our More Than Mood Depression Symptoms Toolkit. You'll find the rest of the toolkit on our website at www.familyaware.org/more-than-mood. Thank you for joining us. Let's start the webinar. During this webinar, we'll briefly review symptoms that many people associate with depression. Then we'll delve into how depression affects one's thinking, and I'll introduce you to our shorthand way of talking about these symptoms. Following that, I'll have a conversation with Dr. Alice Medalia, who is an expert in cognitive impairment associated with psychiatric disorders. Then I'll give an overview of the information that we've developed in our More Than Mood Toolkit, after which the webinar will conclude. I'd like to point out that Families for Depression Awareness has other webinars available for your viewing. If you're interested in them, please check out our website. So first, let me very briefly tell you a little bit about our organization. Families for Depression Awareness is a national nonprofit organization that provides education, training, and support to family caregivers so they can help their loved ones with mood disorders. Our premise is that depression affects the whole family and that each member has a role and every person's needs should be met. Let's go on then to the familiar depression symptoms. Family caregivers can often notice when their loved one seems sad or irritable or negative or angry, if they're eating or sleeping too much or too little, if they've become isolated, and most particularly if they stop enjoying activities or people that they used to enjoy. Depression is more than having the blues. People with depression experience deep and long-lasting feelings of sadness, persistent irritability or quick anger, or feeling empty or hopeless. The person might also have a very negative view of themselves and feel guilty about how they feel, about how they're affecting their family, that they might need attention, and that they're not behaving how they used to. They might be agitated or restless. They might be more fatigued than usual. Generally, these represent a significant and persistent change, at least 2 weeks, from their usual attitude and behaviors. I would be remiss if I didn't mention 2 important symptoms of depression. If a person is engaging in self-harm, such as cutting, then you should urgently seek medical attention for them. And if someone is having suicidal or homicidal thoughts, feelings, or actions, call 911 or take them to the local hospital emergency department immediately. So depression also affects thinking, and not everyone is aware of this. It can even affect thinking to the extent that people aren't able to do the things that they could easily do before having depression. This is known as cognitive impairment. You might notice, for example, that a person is being forgetful or isn't able to concentrate. They might be having trouble making decisions. They might not be able to make plans. These thinking symptoms can accompany other symptoms or not. And as a way to describe the breadth and nature of these cognitive impairment issues, we at Families for Depression Awareness have come up with an acronym. We call it ROAM. For us, ROAM refers to reasoning, organization, attention, and memory. Let me give you some examples. Reasoning includes activities such as problem solving, exercising judgment, and making decisions. Organization refers to activities such as planning, prioritizing, and managing time, as well as the usual organizing your desk or the kids' playroom. The attention category includes concentrating, focusing, and thinking, but it can also include the slowed down processing speed that people with depression can experience. Finally, memory refers to remembering details and having accurate recollection of conversations, events, and experiences. We chose ROAM to refer to the kind of foggy or empty feeling that many people with depression experience when they try to concentrate or make decisions or remember things or engage in other thinking activities. To us, ROAM evokes a sense of aimlessness or wandering in the desert or in a thick fog with emptiness all around. So let's take a look at a real-life experience. as we present to you one of our volunteers, Don, and his brother, Dan, talking about how depression has affected his attention.
I had a hard time conversing. I'd be standing there with people talking and I couldn't think of anything to contribute to the conversation.
He didn't participate in conversations that he would have normally been right in the middle of.
My one brother said, that when we played games, I just wasn't there mentally, making mistakes that I wouldn't normally do.
When he played like card games, he was always like the one that was probably going to win. But with his major depression, that wasn't him anymore.
As you heard from the clip, cognitive issues can affect performance at work and also at home and at school. It can cause a lot of frustration and self-doubt in the person, and that can work to deepen the depression. How might this play out? Say there are two people living in a household. One has depression, the other does not. So the one without depression asks the other to call the cable company and change their service. That person agrees. Later, when asked how the call went, the person with depression says they forgot to do it. You can see how that would be frustrating for both people involved. It might also exacerbate feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, so that person is further caught in the depression cycle of negative thinking. Another particularly vexing thing is that after other depression symptoms are well managed, cognitive impairment issues can persist. But let's bring in an expert to talk more about cognitive issues and depression. It's my great pleasure to bring along Dr. Alice Medalia. Dr. Alice Medalia is a professor of medical psychology and psychiatry at Columbia University Medical Center. She's clinical director of the Cognitive Health Services at the New York State Office of Mental Health, which serves over 700,000 people. In addition, she's director of the Lieber Recovery Clinic. Dr. Medalia has been instrumental in raising awareness about the need to address cognition as a central aspect of health related to functional outcome. Her key contribution to psychiatry relates to her application of motivation theories to the treatment of cognitive disorders. Dr. Medalia has developed treatments for cognitive dysfunction that have been used worldwide. Her primary research interests are in treating cognition, improving motivation, and facilitating recovery among people with mental illness. Dr. Medalia, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Susan.
So first, let me ask, could you tell us about your professional experience and your interest in the area of cognitive impairment and depression?
Sure. From the beginning, I trained both as a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist, so I've always been simultaneously interested in disorders of cognition, behavior, and emotion. And actually, for many years, I worked in both the departments of neurology and psychiatry, diagnosing and treating people with neurologic and psychiatric conditions that impact cognition, behavior, and emotion regulation. But since 2007, I've really focused more on the psychiatric conditions in my roles at Columbia University in the Office of Mental Health for New York State. My work focuses on how to help people make a recovery, and that means not just symptom recovery, but recovery of abilities to function effectively in their various roles in the community. Cognitive impairment turns out to be a very significant reason people with depression are not able to function effectively in their social, family, work, and school environments. My goal is to improve and expand the delivery of services that address not only the emotional and behavioral problems linked to mental illnesses, but also the cognitive problems. And it turns out that cognition is often sidestepped when people focus on the mood component of depression. So it really has required a comprehensive effort to bring the spotlight back onto cognitive health.
Well, we certainly appreciate your efforts in that regard, because we know from our experience of working in this office that people are not very familiar with the cognitive symptoms. But that's just regular people who know that there's a problem and they're not quite sure what it is. How long has the medical community recognized that cognitive impairment is a symptom of depression?
Well, I think there's always been recognition of that, but what really changed, and maybe it was Leslie Keelo's, he wrote a paper in 1961, which I think was actually a turning point for the field. He described 10 people with depression and cognitive impairment, and he called it pseudo-dementia. That wasn't the first time the term had been used, but he focused on the reversibility of these cognitive problems, and that was new. And so clinicians really started to pay more attention to the cognitive problems, because they then saw that if you accurately diagnosed what was causing them, it really had implications for the treatment and course. So if someone's cognitive problems were due to depression and not, say, Alzheimer's, well, that meant that you were going to be giving a different treatment. If it's due to depression, you would be giving antidepressants, where if it were due to Alzheimer's, you might use completely different class of medications. So over time, the term pseudo-dementia sort of became a catchphrase for reversible cognitive impairments in people with psychiatric disorders, especially the elderly or older people with depression. I'd say more recently, there's been a shift away from studying how to differentiate the cognitive problems of depression from those of dementia. And instead, people are really looking at the nature and course of cognitive problems in the various affective disorders. And those studies have really brought recognition that cognitive deficits in depression are not just found in the older age groups, but across all age groups and across all types of depression. And very importantly, research is showing that cognitive impairments persist even when the mood symptoms disappear. So that's been a real change in the field. Also, we're recognizing that antidepressants don't treat all cognitive deficits in the affective disorders. So while it's true that some cognitive symptoms might improve in tandem with mood improvement, 95% of people who have a unipolar non-psychotic depression, and these are people ages 18 to 65, they'll continue to show cognitive impairment 8 weeks after starting antidepressant treatment, even when their mood symptoms improve. So there's been a real shift in the field from thinking about the cognitive problems of depression as being more evident in older age groups, to recognizing it across all age groups, to also understanding that it's present across different types of affective disorders, and that it isn't solely linked to mood.
So that's a shift in the mental health community. Do we see that same kind of understanding among non-mental health medical providers?
Well, I think that cognition is a term that means something different to many people, and so I would say that it's been a bit slow for in the non-medical community for people to understand that the cognitive problems are a somewhat independent symptom of of affective disorders. And by independent, I mean they're not just related to mood or motivation.
Okay. So we know that a lot of people have depression. We know a lot of people have this impairment, but how does it affect families? Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Well, let's just start with the impact on a family of someone having a very specific cognitive problem, like having difficulty paying attention. You know, one of the things that makes personal relationships rewarding is the give and take of support and caring and concern. People want others to really listen and pay attention to them. So if someone with depression is not able to attend to or remember what their family member is saying, their relative may feel hurt or not listened to. Another way that attention impacts family is when chores don't get done and the family ends up picking up the pieces and having to do it for them. The ability to pay attention and to be focused and not get distracted, it's important for virtually all areas of functioning. But the family member may start to think the person doesn't care because they weren't paying attention to what they're saying and doing. Or another specific example is processing speed. That's how quickly you can take in and use information. Family might get frustrated because the response time is much slower. It takes longer for someone to register and understand information, and their speech production can seem slower. You know, and even though it might just be 30 seconds, that can seem like a long time when you're talking to a person, trying to have a conversation with them. So those are some specific examples, but I think more generally, there is a dynamic that occurs when one person is not able to fully participate in their role because of cognitive problems. Family members might find that they adapt themselves to the person's cognitive dysfunction by acting on behalf of them. And that kind of adaptation fosters dependence. It's not an ideal adaptive approach, and it can lead to caregiver burden, frustration on everyone's part, and eventual resentment and burnout. So those are some specific and general examples.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see how that would erode trust and really the basis of the relationship.
Yeah, it becomes a real burden on everyone. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned about not paying attention and not being quick to respond. What other things might cause a family member to notice that, or a family caregiver to notice when they're trying to figure out if someone is having impaired thinking related to depression?
Mm-hmm. Well, some people evidence memory problems. They might forget to, go to their appointments or to do chores, follow schedules. They forget where they put things. A big issue is forgetting medications, to get them, to take them. So memory is a very common complaint from people suffering from depression, and it's often noticed by family members. Other people have trouble setting and carrying out plans. The dishwasher makes strange sounds and nothing's done. It stops working and it just sits unused. Or somebody who's depressed may have gotten reprimanded or even laid off from work, and the person doesn't seem to be making efforts to change their situation by finding different work or trying to solve the problem at their job. And some people even say they don't have any goals. And what might look like a lack of motivation to the family member could in fact be caused by impaired problem-solving skills, difficulty keeping goals in mind. It's to be motivated, you have to know what your goal is. It's hard to stay motivated if you lose track of your goal and if you can't figure out the steps to get to your goal. The work example is an example of a long-term goal, but you can even see that in shorter-term goals. Critical thinking, planning, organization, problem solving, these are things we kind of put together and call executive functioning, because an executive needs all those things to do their job. An example of when you use those skills happens every day. If you're cooking a meal, you know, even if you know how to cook each dish, to actually serve a dinner with several dishes, you're going to have to plan ahead, have all your ingredients, organize and manage your time so that everything's finished at the same time. And you might have to adapt your plans if problems arise, if the oven isn't working right, you're missing an ingredient, a pan is missing. So something, you know, that we kind of routinely do, like putting a meal on the table, can actually become very challenging to somebody with the problems that you all have described as Rome. People with depression may seem less able to think of alternate strategies for dealing with problems that arise. They have trouble coming up with plans. They find it hard to listen critically to new information and to know what's important and what is not.
So that filtering sounds like a real challenge. The organizational issues certainly make an argument for a crock pot, so that there can be one meal and it's one dish and it's all ready for the meal. But then again, you have to plan ahead early enough that it has time to cook. So say we know people living in an environment like this where one person is really struggling, and in fact, two people may be struggling because of one struggling. What can a family caregiver do to support his or her loved one so that they can overcome these functionality problems?
Well, I'd say they're both general strategies and specific strategies to give support. Why don't we talk about the overall goal, which I think it's to help the person stay cognitively active and to feel good about themselves as someone who's contributing to family life with their cognitive skills. So those are two, I would say, you know, keep your eye on those two overall goals. And in terms of specific strategies, there are many. You were already starting to think of one when you said use a crock pot for dinner instead of trying to put a dinner together with 3 different components. Crock pot has everything in one dish, right?
Right.
But in terms of, the goal of helping someone stay cognitively active, try to do things together with your family member, and hopefully things that will be fun and not stressful. Playing cards, doing puzzles, reading together, reading a short article and discussing it, playing games, discussing what you see on TV. If you're watching something on TV, talk about it to make sure the person's really cognitively engaged in processing it. Anything that's going to require use of multiple thinking skills is going to be helpful to a person's recovery. There are things that aren't directly cognitively related that are useful. We know that being active, physically active, and exercising is important. Taking a walk together, doing floor exercises, playing ball, doing yoga, whatever it is that you and your family enjoy doing as activities together, physical activity, could be helpful. And I also don't want to forget healthy eating habits, because cognition really functions best when people are physically active and eating well. And the other thing is just having people around. If the goal is that someone be cognitively engaged and active, try not to let them sit alone for long periods of time. Having people around who are talking, even if the person doesn't seem to be actively participating in the conversation, if they're present, it's going to be good for them to be around social interactions. And in terms of specific strategies that you can do to help with any one cognitive problem or any one situation that's being affected by cognition, certainly having planners and calendars is useful. It's important with calendars that it not just say, doctor's appointment at 11 o'clock, but use your sticky notes to remind the person where the appointment is, or anything that needs to go to the doctor. So trying to have by the door a place where people keep things that they need to take out with them that day, helping, or structuring the environment so the person can remember things better is really helpful. In that regard, it's really good to look at medications. A lot of people are taking not just one medicine, but several. So having a pill box and checking it and making sure, there's so many different kinds of pill boxes, you want to make sure the one you have is useful. You might find that you have to repeat instructions, put things in writing so that there's multiple sensory input. They hear it, they see it. If you're asking people to write things down, make sure that that note gets taken with them so it's put in a place where they'll remember it. There are all kinds of memory aids out there right now, right? And certainly our phones and electronic devices can be helpful to somebody, but you might need to set it up so that there are the reminders and alarms. And concentration is a huge problem for people with depression. They'll report that they're not reading as much. They can't, even if they're watching TV, they're not following the storyline. So family members can be helpful by discussing, breaking things into smaller pieces, stopping the TV when they're reading, trying to have a conversation about what they're reading. Mindfulness is very helpful when you're having concentration problems. So those are some strategies I'd suggest.
Let me pick up on one thing. You had mentioned being physically active and then eating sensibly. We've also heard that getting appropriate amounts and adequate sleep is useful for dealing with depression overall. Is that something that is also important when dealing with cognitive issues?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely. I mean, it's no one can think straight when they're sleep deprived. So definitely getting good sleep is important.
So trying to get on a regular sleep cycle would,
at least
perhaps a person could be encouraged to do.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing is to get enough sleep. As people get older, they're less likely to take all their sleep in one sitting. It's very normal that people wake up. So, the key things to do are to make sure that they're getting enough sleep in any 24-hour period for them, and there's certainly some variation in what is enough sleep for somebody, but most people need around 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So for an older person, they may not do that all at one time, but in a 24-hour period, people usually need that much sleep. So the use of electronics when you're falling asleep can be disruptive to falling asleep. So sometimes just reviewing what is going on when someone's trying to go to sleep is important. And obviously getting people on a sleep cycle that's going to promote more social interaction is useful. If someone's sleeping all day and then they're prowling around and up at night when everyone else is asleep, then they're going to be less cognitively engaged just because there are less people around to engage with.
Which leads me to another point. When we talk about family caregivers, most people picture somebody living in the same household, but often we're talking about someone who has a connection to and responsibility for someone who's in another place. Say it's a young adult in college away from home, or an adult child who has concerns for their parent with depression who doesn't live in the same place. But the kinds of strategies for cognitive engagement, like watching a television show or reading an article and talking about it, those are the kinds of things that you can also do remotely.
That's true. That it's become more and more possible to connect with people remotely. And that's very helpful. Although I would say that, usually those are, people don't usually do that for more than a half hour at a time, and that's certainly better than nothing. If you're not in the same locale. But then if you're not in the same locale, I might think about ways to have, other people stop by or visit, and organize, just to help organize an environment that's going to be engaging.
That's very useful, because I know that the distance creates a level of anxiety for people when they're not able to keep as close an eye on their loved one.
Yeah.
So knowing that these are important issues that can most definitely affect functioning, if a person is involved in the treatment for their loved one, how might these concerns be raised with the person's clinician?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess first talk to your family member about cognition and make sure that you're both talking about the same thing, and that what we're talking about here are ability to concentrate, attend, remember. And I often like to put things in more positive terms, like, do you think it would be easier for you to do things if your memory were better or if you were able to pay attention, as opposed to saying, think you have a memory impairment, which can make somebody feel like, oh boy, yet one more thing wrong. So, first talk to your family member and then suggest maybe writing down questions or concerns that they want to speak to their provider about, and offer to speak to their provider or to go with them to the session, or to some people, you may not be able to go with them, but you could call into the session. I've seen family members do that, where they'll call in while someone's meeting with their provider and listen, and just if they see something wasn't brought up that they know their loved one wanted to bring up, they'll say, oh, by the way, we had talked about your asking about this. So that's one thing to do. When you're actually speaking to the provider, I would explain that your family member's having trouble paying attention and remembering, and that it's interfering with doing things that are important for them, and give specific examples. Many people don't know what is meant by cognition, and they may think you're talking about depressive thoughts and beliefs. So when you say, I think my family member is having cognitive problems, the provider might think that you're talking about a depressive belief that they're no good or things are hopeless. That's a cognitive thought, right? But
Negative
what we're,
thought.
and it's a negative thought, and it certainly is a concern in treatment. But what we're talking about today is a different type of cognition, different level of cognition, and that's the aspects of cognition that together allow you to think. So your ability to pay attention, to remember, to process information. So that's why it's useful to be specific and to say, so and so has forgotten to do the things that their boss asked them to do, and it's causing problems at work. They want to do it, but they're not remembering. So try to be specific with examples, and then ask questions about the treatment and whether the treatments are designed to improve cognition. That would be your question. Are these medications or are these other treatments designed to improve someone's attention and memory? Will these therapies benefit cognitive functioning in the areas of processing speed, memory, attention? So those are specific questions you can ask. And then listen for specific results-oriented answers. Is the provider clearly understanding what you mean by cognition? And are they talking about the treatment as it relates to cognition? If you're concerned, you can certainly ask what a provider's background is in addressing the neurocognitive symptoms. And you can also question whether a referral to a specialist is indicated.
Those are all important strategies. I think one of the first things about talking with your loved one about some things that might be challenging now but could be better is important. And I think we can tie in something that you said earlier, and that is if the person is not bringing their caregiver to the appointment, then a list could be very handy. Let's sit down and talk about it ahead of time. Let's write out the things so that you'll have this prompt to discuss with your provider.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So doing all of these things, compensating for the challenges that the person with depression is having, and taking care of the business of the household, and all of that can be very draining and overwhelming for the person who is the caregiver. It's important, and we know that there can be frustration, there can just feel like there's not enough time in the day. There are all kinds of things that can increase stress and tension. So what do you recommend to the family caregiver in terms of taking care of themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you really can't take care of someone else until you take care of yourself. So that's incredibly important. And along those lines, you sort of have to know your limits and be sure to carve out time for yourself. Ways to do that, I think it's good to identify some people in your life who you know are supportive and spend time with them. Maybe by supportive, that means listening to you talk about this particular situation, but maybe it just means people who don't know exactly about the situation, but who can offer some downtime and distraction, going to a movie or taking a walk together. And it's helpful to have several people in your life like that, so that you're not just turning to one person. And if you're, for whatever reason, in a place where there's no one around like that, then now with the internet, we have meetup groups, and there are, you can take a class, so you can get into the community, and there's so many different ways to get together with people to do things out in the community. So having that kind of downtime for yourself is really important. And I think many people find it very helpful to get information. And there's now such a wealth of information on the internet. So, pick one or two resources and learn about what you're dealing with. And that kind of information can give you some perspective and a knowledge base so that you know what you're dealing with. And certainly all the things that I said about the person who has depression would apply, eating healthy food and exercising, taking time for yourself, sleeping, and being engaged in the community are all going to be helpful to the caregiver.
Yeah, I would think that us trying to dispel the pervasive idea that self-indulgence is a negative. What I'm hearing from you is that you need to take time to sort of nurture your own self in order to be able to have the wherewithal to help others. Can you say something about setting boundaries so that people don't become overtaxed or involved in things that they are concerned about?
Yeah, and I'll give some specific ways to set boundaries. So, when you're thinking about being helpful to somebody, you could try and divide it into two bins on any given day or week. You could think about the amount of time that you will allocate, and you can think about the specific tasks that you would do. So, and I think being structured about it, maybe even writing it down, so that if you're thinking about the time that you'll devote, having a sense of your day and knowing that you will, between, these hours, or when you're going to be there and give them your undivided attention. Or maybe these are the hours when you actually won't be able to give them your attention. So being clear about your schedule and when you're going to be helping them is one way of approaching it. And the other way of setting some boundaries is being very clear about what you'll help them with, what exact tasks. Are you going to be cooking? Did you decide you want to cook that day? Do you want to take a walk with them? Do you want to go see a movie with them? So I think those are concrete ways to set boundaries, is to kind of parcel your time that way. That way you know what to expect, and you can, at the end of the day, kind of check back and see whether you did what you planned to do, and if not, how come, and what would you like to do? You can start all over the next day.
You've devoted a lot of your career and thought and time to these issues around cognitive dysfunction. And I would think that that's because you have hope for people who are experiencing this. Can you talk some about what gives you that faith?
Well, I suppose it's faith, but it's actually pretty scientifically grounded. So it is well known that our our brains actually continue to change and grow and respond. And that's true even when we're sick. So even when you have an affective disorder, your brain is able to continue to change, and it's changing in response to things going on around you. And so that is really what's so exciting, is the capacity of people to learn, even in the face of having an illness. That's a huge change in our understanding from as recently as the 1950s. People still really doubted how adaptable the brain was, but after a certain age, we appreciated that in youth that there was the brain was growing and developing, but it continues to. So I am quite confident that people with cognitive problems due to depression are able to improve their cognitive skills, because we have research showing that. We have randomized controlled trials showing that it's possible to make those changes. And I think we'll have more and more research showing different ways that people can improve their cognitive skills. So there's lots of people. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. Clinical experience and research.
And for when people are talking with providers and they ask, are these treatments specifically designed to support improvement in cognitive function? What kinds of treatments other than medication might they expect to hear about?
There are a number of new treatments that are, or relatively new treatments that are out, but they're just not widely available. So cognitive remediation or cognitive skills training is a treatment that specifically, engages people's cognitive skills, attention, memory, problem solving, processing speed, and improves those skills. It's just not that widely available. Hopefully in time that will change. And in New York State, for example, that's our mission, is to make it available to everybody. So there's that kind of treatment. And then there are other treatments that are exploratory right now, using technology and medical devices to try and improve cognition. And that's where we're really benefiting from the increasing awareness about cognitive dysfunction and how it impacts people's lives, because now there's a lot of interest in trying to mitigate that and help people make a cognitive recovery.
Well, it sounds all very promising. Thank you so much, Dr. Medalia. We're going to look now at what Families for Depression Awareness has made available for family caregivers and others. We've created a More Than Mood toolkit on our website, and you can find that at www.familyaware.org/more-than-mood. But let me walk you through the elements of it. So one of the things that we're especially pleased with is that we have created a couple of fact sheets. So they are downloadable, and you can take them with you to talk with other people. You can learn more for yourself. But they include what are the ROAM symptoms of depression, ROAM symptoms in the family, action steps for the family caregiver, as well as interacting with providers. We also have created and made available for download a depression symptoms tracking chart so that people with depression and their families and their clinicians can better assess how treatment is working. We have a online depression wellness analyzer that people can customize so that you put in your own definition of wellness and you track your symptoms and behaviors that are important to you. And then the Depression Wellness Analyzer can produce a graph so that you can chart your progress. We also have, in addition to Dawn and Dan, we have a daughter and mother talking about their experience with depression, and that's Monica and Maria. Those, I think you may be able to find shadows of your own experiences and then see how they have gotten through those challenges. In addition, we're very pleased to have 2 external resources to support your learning about cognitive impairment. We have a handbook from the New York State Office of Mental Health entitled Dealing with Cognitive Dysfunction Associated with Psychiatric Disabilities, and that was co-authored by Dr. Medalia, as well as video clips from the Teach Recovery program at Columbia University so that you can see more about how cognitive impairment can impact your life and how it can manifest in life. I would like to take a moment to thank Dr. Medalia for sharing her professional expertise and her time with us. And thanks are also due to the Takeda-Lundbeck Alliance for supporting the More Than Mood Depression Symptoms Toolkit. We hope that you'll take the time to visit our website and learn more about depression and bipolar disorder. You can access additional resources we have there, like our mental health family tree. You can learn more about volunteering, and we certainly welcome your financial support, which allows us to help more families who are struggling with depression or bipolar disorder. And the thing that you should know is that families do help. It can sometimes be discouraging to try and help someone who has depression, but remember, depression is treatable. And people who have strong family or social support have better treatment outcomes than those who don't. We hope that this webinar inspires you to take action and also reminds you that people with depression can have productive lives with fulfilling relationships. Thank you for watching.